Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. So design thinking has transformed how we approach products and services, but what does it really look like when we apply it to people, culture, and organizations? How do you move from post-it notes and empathy maps to real organizational change? To explore the intersection between design thinking and organization development, we're joined by the brilliant Giles Wright. Giles is an experienced practitioner who's helped leaders and organizations use design principles to rethink systems, services, and culture. Giles has been applying design thinking long before it became a buzzword, and he's passionate about how it can transform the way organizations work. Giles is a seasoned design leader with over 20 years of experience navigating complexity across private, public, and not-for-profit sectors. He's the founder and director of From Here, and it's on a mission to make human-centered design affordable and accessible for non-profits. Giles has a degree in product design and a career spanning national programs, integrated care systems, and organization transformation. And his approach blends systems thinking, inclusive design, and organizational strategy as well. And his work has tackled really big questions which are fascinating, such as how might we shift perceptions of palliative care and create services that are a positive experience, and how might we protect 12,000 frontline staff from COVID-19, and how might we imagine volunteering. So a huge thank you for joining us on a Friday afternoon, Giles. We're really looking forward to this call.
Thanks for having me. It's really exciting to be here. I'm just going to be honest about that. It's great.
We're really excited to have you with us as well. We've got lots of questions. This is an area we've been kind of keen to explore, so I think we're going to have a really good conversation. So Garen gave us a bit of a kind of headline of what you do, but could you just expand on that a little bit more and bring it to life for us? What is the work that you're doing or do?
Yeah, sure. So I think design runs through my veins. So I call it work, but actually it's just joy. It's just what I love doing. It's natural to me. What I'm commissioned to do is to work with clients that have an idea of the change they want to make, whether it's a structural change or a service change or some sort of transformation in their organisation. They're struggling with the how to do it and how to land it well. So often what I found is people can articulate what they're trying to achieve. They can often articulate why they want to achieve it, what's driving it, and then really struggle with the how, and they get quite fearful about doing stuff. There's two purposes, isn't there, to most organisations. One is deliver on your goal, your mission, and two is to de-risk it, make it as low risk as possible, right? So in the charity sector particularly, obviously funding is tight and nobody wants to waste money. So doing the how really well in a way that it's going to land as positively as possible is the bit I think I help the most with.
And then we've used that term design thinking. Not everybody will know what we mean by that, and there will be lots of different variations of what we mean by that. So how do you define design thinking? What are the kind of core principles for you?
Yeah, so design thinking is a label, you're right. And as practitioners, we like to put labels on things we do, don't we? That's kind of how we feel special, I think. So design thinking, human-centered design, good design, all of it is pretty much the same thing. It's about getting you from here to where you want to be in a way that involves people, gives genuine insight, creates fresh ideas, exciting possibilities, but then crucially does it. So design is a verb and a noun, right? Mm-hmm. So design isn't the kind of shiny thing that spits out the other end. It's also a process that gets there, and it's about answering the brief and delivering against the problem. For me, design thinking is special because it actually starts by designing the problem before designing the solutions. And what I mean by that is often clients will say, this is the problem. This is the frame that we want you to enter our system with. Design thinking takes a step back and goes, is that actually the problem? Let's just check that, make sure it is that. And sometimes actually people have a light bulb moment in the room and go, oh, that's not the problem, is it? It's actually that. Right, cool. Let's lean into that and deal with that. Sometimes it is spot on and it's pretty straightforward and you work with that, but then design thinking opens up. It diverges our thinking. It helps us to be really creative and wide-ranging about our idea generation. And then, crucially, converge that down, because organisations need to get to a point. We can't just drift around in ideas all the time. We have to take them forward. So it then narrows them down, and we test stuff and we try stuff and we evolve it and then we launch it. And then guess what? We go back and evolve it and play with it again and keep it fresh.
Fabulous. And then one of the things we said, this is about the kind of is it like the intersection between design thinking and organisation development, or kind of the overlap? What does that look like for you, kind of bringing the two disciplines together?
Yeah, I'm genuinely really excited about it, and I've been on a bit of a journey. So I qualified as a designer, as the intro said, back in sort of the early 2000s, and I was really privileged to be in a degree course with a course leader, Mike Goatman, who was forward-thinking, was bringing in the ideas the likes of IDEO were having about human-centered design and sort of new vision for design. And design thinking then was very much about products and services to an extent. I think it's been on a bit of a journey, and there's other authors that have written books about how you can apply it to organisation dynamics and organisational design, so the techno-structural bit of OD. So I think that's where it intersects. For me, it's about designing the intangibles just like we design tangibles. Yeah. So the process is very similar. And actually, org development, I've worked with org development practitioners that do very much the psychology and the team dynamics work. That's not so much my bag. But I can see our process and our thinking is quite similar. You do your diagnostics, you do your defining, you do your development of interventions, and then you test them and see what and measure and see what you get. So I think there's quite a few commonalities. I think design thinking for me is rooted in the kind of, like I say, the real nitty gritty of the how and the what and kind of landing stuff and trying stuff and creating it with people, rather than kind of applying lots of theory and practice. That's valid too. It's just slightly different in my space.
And I know when we did the pre-meet, you gave us some really lovely examples of the work that you've been involved in, which I think really kind of brought it to life for me, kind of what it means in practice. So I think there was the COVID example, wasn't there? Can you explain a bit more about that to bring it to life for people?
So I've worked in health sector for about 18 years or so, private sector before that. And when COVID hit, I was working in the NHS and I was leading workforce wellbeing. It was a portfolio I had as a senior leader. I've always applied design thinking, whatever the portfolio is that I've had or the subject matter expertise that I've been asked to have. So when COVID landed, it was like, okay, Giles, how are we going to protect the 12,000 staff that work in our organisation in a large teaching acute hospital? It's kind of like, right, whiteboard, scribble, think. And for me, again, design thinking, it's about knowledge that already exists in a system, but it's crucially about developing new knowledge that doesn't yet exist. So we don't know the answers. COVID, we didn't know the answer. We didn't know how to roll out a mass vaccination program. It had never been done on that scale in this country or in the world, in fact. We didn't know how to mass test for COVID. COVID hadn't existed before. So all these things were new problems that needed new novel solutions, and they were massively steeped in complexity. And again, design thinking loves complexity. It loves ambiguity. It loves working through answers or working through to get to answers. To play it out, Danny, basically, designers don't have the answers. They have the questions and a process and some tools. So my role was to convene people that would have some knowledge and could create the new knowledge. So we had clinical specialists, scientists, operational people, facilities people, technology people, so on and so forth, in a room. And we said, right, here's our problem. Do we agree this is our problem? Yes, it is. And that actually was quite clear. How do you roll out a vaccination, the novel vaccine, to a huge population in record-breaking time? Pretty clear brief. What we did was we looked at the technical. So you look at the technology, you look at the medicine management, you look at the clinical practice, safety, all those things, but also think about what is this system? The system is a large volume of people going through a particular space and a particular intervention pretty quickly, hopefully low stress, really effectively, and have good flow. And that was pretty much it. And by the way, don't harm them and don't give them COVID. So they were the parameters and the things we were working with. Right, so how do you do that? Well, we don't know how to do it for COVID vaccination, but we do know that other events exist in life where large volume of people go to something, go through it well and have a good experience and come out the other side. So big music events or, theatres or whatever, sports event. Well, what can we nick from that then? How can we apply that stuff to this and then wrap around the technical? So I think that's quite a good example. You kind of look far and wide for ideas that you could borrow, although they don't directly apply. there's enough synergy there, and then you work out the detail. And then ultimately what we did was designed it, created it, set it up, and then prototyped rapidly. So we knew that we were safe. We knew that the fundamentals were strong and good. What we then prototyped was the flow through the clinics, the way people booked, the information that was given, the signage. How do we usher people through the space physically well? All those, and we tweaked those, and we just prototyped and prototyped and prototyped, almost on a sort of 3-4 hourly basis right at the beginning. And that's how you do it.
There's loads of fascinating things that you've shared there, and the solution seems brilliant. Like bringing the outside in and looking at it from other models. Like saying this is not a medical problem. This is actually, it's an entertainment industry have dealt with as well. I'm really interested about how you actually convene people. It's one thing to bring clinicians and scientists and nurses and administrators together. How do you make the magic happen? Like, is it like, how do you even go about doing it?
Yeah, I think that's the age-old challenge for any of our work in OD, isn't it, really? And change generally. So I think for COVID, it was slightly unique in that there was a common enemy that united everybody, and it was a very clear purpose. So I think that was the helpful narrative, really, that we were working with. I think in other times, other places, other problems, it's different. It's not always everybody around the table enthusiastic, ready to go and fight the fight. Sometimes you have to work with that narrative and help people understand that there is a problem and agree that there is a problem, or get them from denial or get them from confusion and work for it. And that's the skill of convening. And I think, again, that's one of the lovely intersections with the work that I'm doing is the skill in OD intervention is to get people on board and work with the system and the problem and the challenge. And it's the same for design and design thinking. What I have found is taking people through a process. So we could talk about double diamond design process, but essentially taking people on a journey through problem to solution in creative ways, in facilitative approaches, giving them some tools, and it does start to get some energy and enthusiasm. And then you kind of get into the real work. So just entering people into a spirit of how might we do this is a really nice journey to go on.
And you've mentioned the famous double diamond, which is something that people might be familiar. For some people that are on their first steps of understanding what this, could you just give us a bit of a walkthrough about how the model works and how it all comes together? Yeah,
so it's a model that's around in various versions, but there is a design council kind of licensed and copyrighted, protected version, which is great. And there's a good framework on their website if people aren't familiar and want to go and have a look. It's a really good tool. Essentially, it is literally a diagram which is 2 diamonds, and you start with your exploring problem and challenge. And then the reason they're diamonds is you diverge out with your thinking and exploration, and then you converge back in to define what you're working on and with. And then you diverge out again to idea generate, and then you converge back again to select some ideas that you're going to take through to prototyping, and then you test, and then you develop, and then you launch. Now, that's a really lovely, linear, simple model. In reality, of course, you go around in cycles, and you might go back to the start, a bit like Monopoly. You might get sent back to go, or you might have to go kind of back one step to go forward two, and that's the skill in it, really, is navigating that process and like I say, journey with people. What I will say is in the middle, so if you think left to right, so left is the kind of problem that you're working with. In the middle is the defining it, so you can then start to answer it. And the far right is the kind of outcome, or the output at least, so sort of the thing that you're going to change. Quite often clients and organisations generally, whether you're internal or external consultant, they will enter you into the thing in the middle. So they will have what they believe a defined issue is, or set of symptoms or problem. Again, design thinking, you enter the system there, but actually, like I said earlier, you go back to, is that really the challenge? Is that the problem? And one of the best ways to do that, it's not mine and it's been around for a long time, but I still love it. And I worked with a group on Friday doing it, and it's so exciting when it works. Apply 5 whys. So if I say, Garen, Danny, my problem is blah, 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 and you say why, I then answer, you say why again and again and again. The depth of thinking and thought and reflection and detail and insight is quite remarkable, actually. And people often will say, we don't have time to explore these problems. We've just got how long does it take to do 5 whys? Like 10 minutes, quarter of an hour maybe in proper detail. And it gets you such a different starting point which is very exciting. I had somebody on Friday say, "Oh, that's not the problem, is it? That's the problem," and you're like. But it's great because then they're energized. So back to your point before, how do you energize people and get them involved? Get them to where the real crux of the thing is, because then they suddenly get a gut feeling of, okay, cool, let's do this.
So if you sort of you go through the process, does it have like one project lead and it's the same people throughout the process, or do people sort of step in and step out as you go through the process?
Yeah, I think it varies depending what the problem is. Often you will have one convener. So whether that's me being asked to facilitate or somebody internally with some support, shadow consulting, normally you have one convener that holds it all together throughout and will oversee it. And you generally have some sort of project management person or capability around it as well, just to make sure that you move things through. But we're not a Gantt chart process. It doesn't quite work like that. And then you'll have subject matter experts. So when you're idea generating, you want as many different skills and backgrounds and perspectives as you can get, and you want to use all of them and see if you can put them together to make something that's much more robust and multifaceted. When you get into prototyping, you might change. So it might be that actually a technical person is the person that needs to create the thing to prototype it. And other people will step back. You might have somebody that's particularly good at ethnographic research or observation or measurement. They might take the lead at that point to see what it's doing and is it doing what it should be doing. So I think sort of the further you go on in the process, you probably are narrowing down and using subject matter expertise.
One question I was just wondering there as well. So how would someone know that they need some design thinking? You know, as I'm faced by this titanic problem, I've got to get 12,000 people through this thing and I can't give them COVID. You know, do they go through the Rolodex and go, right, okay, trainers, no, learning and development, no, design thinkers? Like, how do I know that it's a design thinking issue?
So I think it's the best kept secret out there, actually, in some ways. So there's a guy called Roger Martin in 2009 wrote a book, Business of Design, I think it's called, or something similar, and basically said, look, design thinking used in organisations like Procter & Gamble, for example, is revolutionising how they innovate and how they land good products and good services. And actually, everybody should be learning this in their leadership development portfolio. It's kind of a key skill, and you don't necessarily need specialists, but everyone should have some understanding. That hasn't really progressed. So there's an academic, Ida Engholm, in sort of 2019, I think, did a study of design thinking, this so-called design thinking thing. Where's it showing up? How's it showing up? And she said, okay, it's got roots in kind of graphics and products originally, and then it moved into sort of services and stuff. And then it's moved into kind of organizations, teams and systems. And it could actually work on much bigger population size challenges or countries or even the world, kind of climate change types. But in reality, in 2019, 90% of design thinking or design thinking and doing was still focused on the kind of graphics to sort of services type stuff, and only 10% really in organizations and system change and design. So I think it's still pretty out there. So I don't think most leaders in most organizations will go, I need a design thinker, where's the yellow pages? I just don't think it's like that. I think what they do is they go, we've got a problem, we need a creative solution. Who's around that's good at making stuff happen? Who's good at problem solving? And actually, when I've looked at my value proposition out there, I'm not really selling myself as a design thinker or a human-centered designer. I did start that, funny enough, and I gave myself a label and an identity. But actually what it is people just want effective problem solving. That's kind of it. And this is a great way of doing it.
Hi, we're just pausing this interview for a moment. Have you ever finished an episode of the OrgDev podcast and wish you had a cheat sheet that summarises all of the key points? Us too, so we made one. It's called From Pod to Practice, and each week in our newsletter we'll share a 2-page summary of the latest OrgDev episode, and it includes key takeaways, a reflection prompt, and one small action you can try.
And it's all in a digital format with space at the end to add your own notes and reflections, and it's designed to help you take the learning from the podcast into your day-to-day work. So to get your copy, just sign up to our Next Step to Better newsletter. The link's in the show notes, or you can visit our website at www.distinction.live to get the latest From Pod to Practice in your inbox. And let us know what you think. We'd love to get your feedback.
So, Giles, what was your journey into the field? You've had a fascinating career to date, haven't you?
Yeah, I've had, fascinating is one description for it, Gary. It might be also called squiggly. I don't know. You can be the judge. But yeah, so one of the things I've learnt from OD is kind of use of self and self-reflection, and I'm quite a big fan of that. And I've done a fair bit of that over the last year or so, and kind of working out where I've come from and why and how I've ended up where I've ended up. I think kind of going back, not wanting to turn this into a therapy session, but kind of going back to where I started as a young person, as a child. I was quite a poorly kid. I had a lot of quite severe asthma, and I spent time off school, and I had to be plugged into a nebulizer to get meds and all that kind of stuff. And I spent a lot of time with a tray on my lap and just kind of doodling and drawing and making stuff like lots of kids do, I guess, but I did it kind of on an uber scale. And I remember designing kind of fictional businesses and products and shops and all sorts of random stuff and brands and things. So I think that's kind of where it started. It was this sort of getting in my own world and my own space and kind of creating it. It was quite good fun and probably a bit weird for most average kids, but it worked for me. And there was a bit of skill development, I guess, in there as well, kind of drawing and stuff. And then fast forward into school, I didn't like primary school. I quite enjoyed senior school. I liked tech, and I got introduced to design, technology and art and all those good things. And they were by far my favourite subjects. And then I thought, I might be an architect. I quite like the idea of creating buildings and structures and stuff. Then I kind of went, 7 years, I'm not so sure I want to study for 7 years. That seems a bit heavy. What else? Basically, I went to college and did graphic design, and I kind of wanted to step out of the school environment in something else, a bit more freedom. I went to art college, absolutely loved it, just getting kind of covered in stuff and making things out of bits of card and all that kind of, it was great. It was like playtime for teenagers, and it was kind of getting something out of it as well, qualification. And then there was something about the tangible. So this is this sort of interesting journey of something about making things and solving physical problems. So I went to university and I started product design. But when I was there, like I said earlier, when I was there, it was introduced to human-centeredness, kind of seeing the world through the lens of the people you're trying to impact and improve lives for. And my major project was in a piece of paramedic equipment, because I wasn't really into kind of designing phones and headphones and shiny stuff. I kind of wanted to solve the world's problems and kind of do things that mattered to lives. And I went and spent time with paramedics and observed that it was really difficult for them to lug all their kit around, and they had umpteen bags and blah, blah, blah. And I said to them, I've noticed this. Would it be useful if you had kind of like one trolley, like a suitcase with everything in, but like really well organized? They said, that's amazing. Yeah, that would be great. So I designed that, prototyped it, and we tested it, and that's what I created. And it was brilliant. I loved it. And then I went to be a designer for a bit, and I was designing kind of bits of plastic, which it was fun. I was a designer and I'd qualified and got a job, but it didn't really satisfy me, on a personal level. I went into brand and marketing, and it was great, and it paid the bills again. It didn't really sit with my values. It was kind of about profit and product cycles and stuff. And then I went into health. So I went into a hospice, and I got a job as head of comms, and I kind of talked my way into it and sort of said, I think it's about communication. I think it's about kind of problem solving and selling stuff with integrity and telling good stories. And by the way, I've got a graphics qualification. They were like, that's great. You can do stuff as well as kind of, all the writing bit, you can make things. So I did that, and I did it for 5 years. And because it was a voluntary sector organisation and a charity and relatively small organisation, I got involved in all kinds of stuff, including service design. And I had a great chief exec mentor who said, Giles, I think we could do better with day therapy services and sort of day care for end-of-life care patients. Do you want to have a go at designing something with the team? And I was kind of like, yeah, great. If you think I can, yeah, brilliant. And we did. And we went on that process, that double diamond process, basically. And we worked it through, and we brought patients in, like people nearing the end of their lives. You can't involve them. Like, they really wanted to shape services. And like, they didn't want us to make that decision for them. They wanted to be asked and then involved. And so we did. And it was great. And families and all sorts of it. It's a real human-centered stuff in reality, in some of the most difficult circumstances for individuals, but it was rewarding and energizing, and we got to a much better result a much better outcome as a result. So I did that and did it for 5 years. And then my mentor said, kind of go somewhere else, spread your wings, go and try different systems, different scale. Go. And I went into a really large hospital. And I went into volunteering, and they said, can you transform volunteering? And I said, well, I've come from a voluntary sector organisation. Yeah, I think I have a go at that. So I transformed volunteering, and we put volunteering onto the map and gave it a profile and professionalised it and took them through a change journey. And then they said, could you do that for occupational health? So I went to occupational health and did it for occupational health. Then well-being, kind of what's workforce well-being in the modern organisation, in frontline challenges and so on. And I did it for that. And then COVID came along, and we've talked about COVID. And then I moved sort of into OD after that, and kind of employee experience design and employee engagement design. How do you purposely design a value proposition for a workforce that retains them, but also satisfies their needs, meets their needs, and makes them proud to be in an organisation and advocate for an organisation and be effective in an organisation. So I did that as well. So design thinking is the thread that's always run through it, just played it out in different circumstances, in different ways. And then I've kind of gone, I've always wanted to do this on my own, and I really love charities, and I'm really feeling a pull back to the non-profit sector, and they're having such a rough time. Funding's harder and services are more in demand, and I really think design thinking could help and have some value for people. And how can I do that affordably for them, with them? So that's where I'm at now. So yeah, real squiggly career, but design running right through it like a spine, I think.
One of the things you talked about there, it's a fascinating journey, but you were talking about volunteers there. And we know that a few of the people that actually watch this, they work in not-for-profits. They really rely on the volunteering workforce as well. But volunteering doesn't often have a home within an organisation. You know, does it sit in HR? Does it sit in another part of the organisation? How do you go about creating a sense of belonging and inclusion for volunteers so they're out in the field and they feel part of something they're not actually employed by? Is it possible?
Yeah, it's completely possible. It's not easy, but it is completely possible. My first experience of volunteers and managing volunteers was in the hospice. Interesting ratio. We had about 100 staff at that time and 500 volunteers. So volunteers were everything. They were the energy, the lifeblood, the capacity, all of that stuff. So it was a good dynamic to get immersed in and introduced to. Managing volunteers, quite tricky. These people are giving up their time and enthusiastically giving of themselves, and kind of, how do you manage those? You don't have the same contractual levers or incentives or whatever. So you have to tap in, again, human-centered. You have to tap into what their motivations are and what their belief systems are and their values and why are they doing it. It's that why question again. And then what do you do to get all the organisational bureaucracy and barriers out the way to enable them to do it, but to do it well and to do it safely, you have to have some governance. So that was my kind of learning, I guess. And then I took that into the NHS. And when I joined, they had a good volunteering programme, and there was sort of some young people that were doing it to get experience of working in a hospital because they wanted to go on and be nurses and doctors and so on. And there were some sort of, I guess, stereotypical older volunteers that were doing it because they wanted to keep active and they wanted to give something back to society and they wanted to be helpful. The challenge was that there was a perception of volunteers that they couldn't do certain things because they weren't paid, because they weren't qualified, because they were sporadic, i.e., less than part-time, didn't have relationships, connections, trust, all that kind of stuff. So that was like, that's a problem statement. Again, it's like, just begging for a design solution. How might we change those things? Because fundamentally believe that actually volunteers could be a really good, useful part of the workforce that would work for them and for patients and for the organisation. So set about talking to them, watching them, listening to them, working out what the barriers were, what the issues were. How could we build trust? How could we build competence and capability? How could we build connections and relationships? How could we design new things that they could do that were answering real problems that our paid staff had or patients were experiencing? So lots of observation, lots of listening, lots of talking, lots of relationship building, both with volunteers, but also paid staff, clinical staff, ward staff. And then get a set of things like tasks. How do you do that stuff? How do you design training? How do you professionalize them? How do you put them on the map? How do you give them a profile? How do you give them a brand? How do you give them an identity? And again, looked out looked, where can we do that stuff? Who does that well? How do you design belonging? And at that time, Starbucks was kind of saying, Starbucks is the third place, right? The third place. So you have home, you have work, and then you have Starbucks in the middle, which is where you kind of go for a drink and to meet people and maybe you do a bit of work there or whatever. Okay, cool. How could the hospital be the third place for volunteers? So they have their social life, they have their family and home life, and then they come and do volunteering the third place. And that's what we did. We created it as a third place. So we literally created an environment that was welcoming and friendly. And I had a very small team, but they were there to be like baristas, welcoming and, creating relationship and getting to know people and talk to them like humans. So we did that stuff. And then we learned from Starbucks how do you create a brand and identity? So we've got them into uniform. We made them feel professional because they looked professional. We put them out into the rest of the hospital, and people started seeing them in this bright red thing that wasn't a colour used in the hospital, and it had volunteer very proudly emblazoned on it. And then they became the thing, and people trusted them for being a thing and having a profile and a presence. And then we wrapped around the governance. So we trained them really well. And we said, we can train volunteers. They're perfectly capable of learning. Let's do some training. And then we taught them sort of skills, and we got them assessed by clinical people so they felt confident they could go and feed patients, or they could help with personal care, or whatever it was that they would do. And we prototyped, and then we tweaked and we adjusted. And then word spread. And actually, I think one of the best things we did was we put a massive board up in the main entrance of the hospital that said, volunteers are here to help you get to your appointment, because that was a huge patient experience issue. It was a massive site, loads of clinics and places to get to, and it was a real headache. And we put volunteer guides in, and we said they're here. And within about 2-3 weeks, patient complaints were dropping and improvements were coming up, and positive experience was coming up, and people were saying, this is brilliant. It's taking the anxiety out of my hospital admission. I was running late and the car park was busy, and I was really afraid I was going to miss this crucial appointment I've waited time for, but you got me there. Or,
Brilliant.
Taking your child in that's having a tough time, and just seeing a smile, and somebody that looked like their grandparent or their brother or sister taking them with them to their appointment was kind of human. And again, it's that human-centeredness approach.
Right. I can attest to this because my youngest was born as Adam Brooks, where this was carried out. And I spent many hours walking around Adam Brooks. and I can attest that when we went to appointments, it almost felt the same support you get in a marathon getting to an appointment in terms of volunteers cheering you on. You can do this, because Adam Brooks is
absolutely.
like a city. It's a huge, huge place. One question I just wanted to ask on the back of that. One thing that you talked about there was observation. Now, that's a very often overlooked element. We run focus groups, we love to interview people, but to actually observe people in the field and get a feel for what's it like. How do you do it? Like, what's good practice to observe, and what are you looking for and what are you noticing?
Yeah, I'm not personally a fan of focus groups. I think they're fine to a point. It's like most things, they've got a purpose and they will get you an answer. But is it the answer that you need? Is it enough of a tool? Generally, when you ask people what is it they want or need, they'll give you something, but it might not be the answer to the actual problem. It's back to what we were saying earlier. So there's an example of a vacuum cleaner company, remain nameless, that was holding focus groups, and they were saying, what's the problem with this thing? And people were saying, well, the brush head could be pointy because then it could get into the corners of the room. And they say, fine, we'll make a pointy one, that's fine. What colour would you like it to be? Could it be red? Because blue's all right, but it doesn't, red would be quite cool. It would be a bit more sexy. Yeah, fine, we'll make it red. And anything else? Well, it could be a bit taller so that I don't have to bend quite so much. Okay, we'll make it taller. Dyson said, I've noticed the thing is, like vacuum cleaners, they just don't clear up everything. Isn't that kind of pointless and annoying? I'm just going to make them work better and then try and see if that helps and see what people think. And guess what? He became market leader and people absolutely loved it. They had no idea that they had a problem, but he did. And then they knew that it was a problem because this thing now works better than it's ever worked before. So that's a really nice example of focus groups will give you an answer, but actually observing and then testing and trying some different stuff out might get you a better answer. So yeah, I'm a fan of observation. I think designers are naturally curious. I think designers are naturally optimistic, possibly even a little bit naive. We think we can always change something and always make something better, but you kind of have to have that belief, right? And that's on behalf of a system. As long as it's with good motivation and purpose, I think that's fine. So yeah, observe. You can ask, and you should ask, and you should listen really, really well, and listen more than you ask, probably, or speak. But that's not enough on its own.
A question I had, particularly working in non-profits, obviously, hugely under pressure, limited resources, everything feels urgent. How do you make the case for engaging in design thinking, which people might perceive as, it's going to take time, we're going to experiment, we're going to fail. Have we got time to do that? Have we got resources to do that? How do you address that challenge?
Yeah, I think it's not dissimilar to any kind of business that's wanting to make an investment and nervous about it because of potential loss or return. I think you kind of have to spin it on its head and go, do we have the money and the time to afford to waste? No, we don't. We probably have less of it than we've had before. So actually getting something right first time and trying to reduce the risk of what we're doing is really, really important. And that's what design thinking does. And it does it well, because you're going to test something that's got real insight with people that really know the answers and have the answers. And I fundamentally believe that the people that work in these organisations are the ones that have the answers, along with the people that they're trying to serve and look after and care and support. They have the answer. So I think that's the best way to reach a solution that's going to be lower risk. I think it is brave particularly to invite somebody in from outside and to invest in that. That's why I'm trying to make it ethical and affordable. I want to do good work in the world. That's my kind of value base. I'm not out to become a millionaire on the back of it. I think it's still a brave commitment. But look, if you've tried everything else and you're still not getting the result you need or want, it's time to do something different. And again, design will give you something different.
And the other question I had for you, what makes somebody a good commissioner of your work? Who are the clients or the commission you go, yes, they've got it. This is the sort of person I can really do good work here.
Yeah, so I'm working with an organisation at the moment, and the person that's brought me in is quite entrepreneurial by mindset, is willing to think differently, gets energised by being agile, which I think a lot of non-profit leaders actually are, because they have to be, and that excites them. Bit of survival instinct and mentality, I think. But fundamentally, they're open. They're open to sharing. They're curious. They're wanting to listen. They're wanting to work with. So it's not kind of a brief lobbed at me and then see you in 6 weeks' time. It's kind of here's what I think we're wrestling with. Can we kick it around together? Can we work it through together? And by the way, here's my team. Work with them. Do what's helpful. So they're real partnership. Actually, I mean, that sounds probably a bit of a cliche, but I think it's true. A designer shouldn't be a single practitioner. They shouldn't be a lone island. That's not how it works. I think a good commissioner also should keep you on track. I mean, designers could, not that I would, but we could get lost in our own ideation for weeks on end because we love it and it's energized. But we have to stay grounded. An organisation needs to get to the solution and it needs to get to an outcome. So I think a good commissioner does that balance, check and balance as well. Equally, a good consultant should keep one eye on time as well.
You mentioned it a few times. It's like test, experiment, all those kind of things. It's a word we often hear sort of chief executives, we want you to go out, we want you to experiment. But that's easier than done. Often there's a little bit of fear attached. How can you create the conditions where testing can happen? And what kind of tests can you do? What's safe to try or safe enough?
Yeah. And I think, to be fair also, leaders hear test and think expense, or they hear creativity and think time, or they hear prototyping and think, oh, it's not going to be good enough. We shouldn't put it out there. A good example of a prototype, right, could be, I'm a designer, so I've always got a marker pen nearby. A prototype could be, this is a bit naff and it's a bit kind of obvious, but an app, right? So we think that the answer to anxiety, human emotions, anxiety in waiting for a clinic appointment, is because people don't know where they are in the process, who they're going to see next. We're going to create an app which people can then kind of see in real time, tells them where they are in the process, what they're waiting for next and who they're going to see. Right, here's a prototype, okay? So you draw, here's your smartphone, here's your screen, this is the thing here, this is the thing here, this is the thing here. That took me, 10 seconds. You take that out into a clinic and you sit with somebody and you say, are we thinking along the right lines? Would that be helpful or not? And they kind of go, that's great, but I don't have a smartphone. Okay, right, we've prototyped that out the window. Yeah, it
No,
took like
some
what?
others would develop the entire thing, and then when they launched it, they would find out, wouldn't they?
So how much did that cost? One post-it note and about 3 minutes.
Mm.
That's prototyping. Now, it can also be, the other extreme. I was being slightly kind of provocative, but the other extreme of that is you could design kind of a whole pathway and a booking system and stuff and get it to the bare bones to try, but you've still invested time and energy and probably some expense, and then you put it out there. And that's okay too. But it's kind of, what's the right level of prototyping for the thing we need to learn from and try out? That's the rule, really. So you're always looking to do it as quick and cheaply as possible, as early as you can, because again, that will send you down the right road, not down the wrong road to what you were just saying, Garen. I had somebody last week said, we were doing some design thinking session, and their kind of thing was, how can we get the voices of patients more readily into our work and inform our work? And somebody said, well, you can't. And one answer was, we could phone them up and just kind of talk to them and listen and then seek permission. People say, well, you can't prototype that. It's kind of like, well, you could. You could get permission from some people, and then you can make 10 phone calls and see what you learn from it. That's prototyping. It would take you half an hour. Quick, cheap, early as possible, make some decisions, and then you can get more sophisticated with it as you have confidence build.
If you're watching this and you want to rewind that bit, this will save your company hundreds of thousands of dollars. We know this, don't we?
We do.
Fabulous. One question for you. What do you enjoy most about the work you do?
Problem solving. So, as my wife will testify, I absolutely hate jigsaw puzzles with a passion, and she quite likes them. And I don't really like board games, but for some reason, organisation problems and design problems are like, a bit of a thing for me. A bit Sherlock Holmesy, I think. Kind of not having an obvious answer to a complex problem is gold. I love it, and getting immersed in it. I also really love mapping stuff. As you probably saw, I love scribbling and sketching and sticking stuff on a wall and working out what the patterns are and all that stuff. So exploration, really, but ultimately it's kind of give me a really nutty, tricky, stuck problem and I'll get completely immersed in it.
People love a tool or a technique. Are there any particular tools or techniques that you find yourself going back to that you'd recommend others kind of investigate?
Yeah, so as I said, one of the most powerful is the 5 whys. And why is it so powerful? Because it's so easy and anyone can do it, literally. And you can't predict where you're going to get to with it, but you can do it fairly safely, actually, and it gets you some interesting insights. So I use that a lot. I like analogous thinking. So what other systems, organisations, setups can you nick ideas from and test them and learn from? I use that quite a lot. A retroactive exercise. Again, I didn't come up with this, but it's super helpful. So basically, you take the thing that you're about to try or do, you imagine that you're the other side of doing it in the future, and you think about the likely things that could have gone wrong with it or why it might not have worked. And you just post-it note, brainstorm it, or Miro board, map it, whatever. And you do it with a group. And then you kind of go, all right, so how do we stop those things happening? So you do a reverse problem solve. And we've done that. We did that with staff survey. We said, right, we need to increase engagement. To do that, we need to get more voices of staff on a really large workforce. We're going to put a survey out. What might stop people completing it? What's going to turn people off? And you get a list of practical stuff, and you get a list of behavioural stuff, and you get a list of logistic stuff, whatever. And then you go, okay, what are the most likely? And then how are we going to sort those out? And then you guess what? You put those things into action at the beginning, and it works. It really does work. And it's like another hour, 2 hours piece of workshop. It's not crazy hard, but it's like everything. It's a tool to be done well with some skill, and then you get good results.
And then we asked you what you love most. What do you find most challenging about the work that you do?
It doesn't happen very often, because generally when people ask you to help, it's because they want the help. But every now and then you'll take people on a process, you'll get through to some really exciting ideas, really encouraging, fired up, and then people, for whatever reason, will panic and not do them, or think of a reason why it's not now, it's not the right time or whatever. As a problem solver, you want the problem to be solved. And as a designer, you want to see stuff created. So that can be quite frustrating. But again, use of self as instrument, you kind of have to think, well, what's going on in the system that's the reason. And it's valid. It's totally valid and it's real. And maybe, you know what, maybe the problem at that point is how do we solve that to enable the thing. So I've kind of matured in life. I've stopped being sort of slightly upset and disappointed practitioner going through to the kind of that intersection with OD again. Okay, let's switch this to being a behavioural problem then. And work with people where they're at to do that bit.
So, Giles, what's particularly interesting you in the field at the moment? Is there anything that's emerging or new ways of working that you think, yeah, do you know, that's really worth exploring, or something you're just starting to use yourself?
Yeah. So I think what's interesting is some patterns I'm noticing, and I've been testing out with some other colleagues, both in design but also in sort of wider OD. So I think what I'm noticing is there's a real hunger for complexity to simplicity. In organisations, they realise they're in a complex world, complex systems, complex dynamics, and are absolutely craving simplicity. And to shift from one to the other possibly isn't doable, but there is a way to structure what they're working with and help them make steps. So I think that's a really interesting thing to kind of explore a bit more. The other thing that I've noticed showing up quite a bit is, I think, particularly in non-profits, actually, particularly in charities, getting really good at insights and understanding why they're doing what they're doing, why there's a need, why X leads to Y and all that. And they kind of have some instincts of what value they could offer to a particular group of beneficiaries, but really stuck on the how. Because what they've done before doesn't now work for the new world. So again, I'm curious and I'm passionate about design leaning into the how. I think AI, inevitably, technology, really interesting. Do I think AI is going to solve all of the problems, automate everyone's roles, do away with design thinking? No, I don't. Why do I think that? Because AI is based on existing knowledge. Design thinking feeds on new knowledge, not yet understood. And I don't think AI can do that yet, and whether it will be able to at all. Where I think it is quite exciting in the field of design and design thinking, though, is that it can rapidly create prototypes. So, you know, back to the example earlier, we were saying if you want to mock up a thing to go and have a conversation, see if it lands well, AI can do that in 30 seconds or a minute. So even if you don't have the skills yourself to produce a thing, it can. If you need to sift a ton of knowledge to help you define and do that convergence piece, AI will do it super quickly. So I'm curious and I'm sort of open-minded to it. I think it's going to be another tool. I don't think it's going to be the solution on its own.
One question we like, when you look back at your career so far, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned along the way that you carry forward with you into your work now?
The biggest one I think I've learned is I don't have all the answers, and that's not my job. And that might sound really odd compared to what I've been saying, but I think when you enter the workplace and you're an employee, you kind of feel like you have to have answers. That's what you're getting paid for. So staying true to what the practice is, which is having all the good questions, is what I've always known, but haven't always practiced. And I've learned that is where I need to stay true to myself and true to the practice. And then refining that skill, asking the questions that might seem so obvious and naive, but they're often the ones that no one else has asked, and they're exactly the right ones. Now, what I found joyful about working with groups in different sectors and different professions is that I don't know what they do, and I'm not paid to know what they do. I'm paid to ask them questions about what they do, and then that unlocks the answers that they didn't have before and gives them enough of an idea of what to do with whatever it is they're wrestling. So that's what I've learned, really. I think questions and skill in asking questions and observing. We've talked about observing, but it's not just what you know, it's what you see. I've got a pretty photographic memory. I'm constantly scanning the world and thinking, oh, that's interesting, and I'll bank that for later, and I'm curious about why they do that. Then use it and apply it, dig it out later.
And I think that kind of mindset of not having to know everything is quite liberating, isn't it? Because it releases the pressure quite a lot, and therefore allows you to focus on your task and where you can add value.
Yeah, I think that's true. And again, kind of as you go through your career, I think different points, that imposter syndrome thing bubbles up. And I know people talk about that quite a lot, and it's kind of okay to talk about that. It's become okay and acceptable to, but it is true. You kind of, particularly when you're doing something and becoming expert in it, it's so natural and kind of second nature that you think, well, surely everybody knows this. And like, I feel a bit fraudulent. This is so obvious and simple and straightforward. And then just kind of checking yourself and going, no, that's why you do it, because it is natural to you and you've learned it. But the world doesn't actually know this design thinking thing or have these tools. If they did, you wouldn't need to do it. So yeah, it's okay.
I think throughout this entire episode, I thought, I want to spend a day in Giles's brain. That's what I just think it'd be amazing. Anyway,
in the mind attic, as Sherlock calls it.
So how do you invest in your own learning and development?
So you possibly can't quite see it, it's off camera, but I've got a whole kind of bookshelves, plural. He says slightly nervously, because every week there's a package coming from World of Books or Amazon or other retailers are available. And my wife kind of goes, now what? Now what are you reading? And on my bedside table, there's a stack of books, invariably design or OD or something similar. I've always been slightly obsessive with non-fiction reading and that kind of stuff. That's always floating my boat. So I read a lot. I'm trying to read around the subject more, actually. Which I think is a good thing. But there's so much out there, and it's sort of slightly addictive, I think, for me. So I do that. I really value relationship and community, and as a consultant, there are just lovely people out there that are also doing consultancy work and are just happy to have a coffee and a chat and share, and there's slightly more structured forum. I love that stuff, and I love talking to people that do slightly different practice and slightly different sectors and things. And again, just sharing the kind of synergies and transferables and thoughts, just kicking around stuff and kind of going, I've noticed this, what do you think? And going, oh yeah, I've noticed that too. What do we make of that? That's all quite exciting, and it's development. And have a coffee and a chat seems slightly fraudulent to call it learning and development, but it is. And that's true. So let's do it.
I'm also a book lover. I love a book, and my reading pile's always huge. So are there any particular books that you'd recommend that stick out for you, that you'd recommend others read?
Yeah, so I think so there's loads around design thinking and human-centered design and organisation design. So we can put a book list together quite happily and share that. I think if you're going to read just one and it's quite a straightforward read and it's really practical, I'd recommend Tim Brown from IDEO, ex-IDEO, and his book called Change by Design. Again, it's probably more towards sort of profit sector, but actually the models, I use them all the time because they're really straightforward, very practical, steeped in decades of doing it and seeing it work. And if it works for massive global companies that IDEO work with, it's probably transferable to smaller niche organisations in different sectors. So Change by Design by Tim Brown, bit of an icon.
And the question we always like to end every episode with is, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out in design thinking or is frustrated? And besides obviously calling you, which we'd really encourage you to do, and your details will be in the show notes, but how might they think about entering the field or learning more?
So entering the field, there's a number of routes. So you come up through traditional design. We haven't got time in this podcast to get on my soapbox and talk about design education, but that's a real bugbear of mine. I think we've taken creative learning out of the curriculum too much, and it's a shame, because I think people need that abductive thinking, that divergence of thinking in the workplace now more than ever. I would say get hold of a book, learn the basics, and just go and try it in your context and see what you get, because it is a practice. It's just going and having a go and then seeing and then building on it and just keep going. Trust it, trust the process. Very good friend and colleague of mine, Toby Lindsay, who you've had on the show before, he said to me a long time ago, trust the process. And it's so true. So just go and have a go and get on with it. And if you want to then wrap some formal qualification and stuff around it, there's plenty of ways to do that out there. And I'm really happy to talk to people about that. But doing it is the learning.
some of the advice that comes out, because organisation development as a field is like, look around your organisation. There's always things that can be improved, aren't there? Is that a tip for somebody who maybe feels trapped in their own role and thinking, how do I get out there? How do I get some runs on the board?
Yeah, I think so. Be a bit under the radar. If you're a bit nervous or a bit new to it or not quite sure, pick something that people aren't kind of all staring at and scratching their heads over. Pick something that somebody hasn't noticed that you think you've got a pretty good chance of doing something good with or sorting out. It might be a little process that is entirely yours, or it might be a way you work with somebody else. Just kind of pull them together, get a thought going, test it out, see what happens, and then if that works, try something a bit bigger, and then build your confidence. There's plenty of stuff that needs to be better, and there's plenty of stuff that can be designed.
Those are wise words to leave us with. Well, I want to say a huge thank you, Giles. It's been a really, really lovely conversation. This is, we really wanted to bring in people that can expand people's thinking and help them think about things right. And you've got ticks all the way down on this. So we've really enjoyed this. So thank you. Danny, what are you taking away from the conversation?
Yeah, it's been a lovely conversation. I've really enjoyed it. So I think you've done a lovely job of bringing design thinking to life and really making it tangible and practical for people to see what it looks like in practice. I love what you said about kind of the importance of defining the problem. The 5 whys is a brilliant tool. So really encourage people to go and start using that. And what you said about prototyping, making it quick, cheap, and do it as easy as possible, and just prototype something, get going. Yeah, and learn from it. Yeah,
and I think absolutely ditto for me. Again, going back to the power of observation, the fact that it's an overlooked thing, and doing a focus group is quite an artificial thing to do, like see things out in the wild, doing what it does. And also, that choosing the right level of prototyping according to what it needs. It doesn't need to be some huge, expensive experiment. It's sort of starting we are as well. And I love the tools that you shared as well, the retroactive and different things as well. Giles, I know that people will have enjoyed this. You've launched From Here fairly recently, haven't you? If people are interested in your work, if they'd like to have a discussion with you, do you know what? I've got this problem and I want to look at it from a different angle. How can people follow your work or reach out to you?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm on LinkedIn. Go and see what I'm thinking about on LinkedIn. But probably the best place to go is my website. So www.fromhere.design, and then my contacts are on there as well. So bob me a line, and really happy to have a chat.
Brilliant. Well, Giles, thank you so much for joining us. Again, what we always say is if you're watching this and you think someone needs to be introduced to the world of design thinking, if you think they're stuck with a problem, then please do share this podcast with them. We get so many brilliant stats every single week of how much this is shared. This week we've hit 100 countries, which is a fabulous achievement. So wherever in the world you're watching this, we just love the fact that we've got people joining us from across the globe. And that's been such a brilliant thing. And the community is growing as well. So if you've enjoyed it, hit the like button, please share it. But most importantly, I want to say a huge thank you to you, Giles. You've been really generous with your time, your expertise and your insights. It's been a fabulous episode and we've really enjoyed it. So thank you for coming with us today.
Thanks very much. It's been delightful and I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Fabulous.